Welcome back, everyone. So the form input is going to be the most complicated thing to style. There's a couple things we need to tweak, and there's a combination of all the little things that we've learned up until this point about style components in order to make this work. So to start, again, I've converted the file over to JSX, and I'm importing and styled from style components. There's actually another thing we're going to need, which is called the CSS block. And what really this allows us to do is encapsulate some CSS inside of a block that we can use as a variable and inject into our different components. The other thing is we need to convert these variables from Sass over into just regular JavaScript variables. So we can actually say const subcolor is equal to the string gray. And we can say the const main color is equal to the string black. So really, that's one thing about style components, is that instead of using Sass variables, you can use regular JavaScript variables. Here for this mixin, this is what I'm going to call a const of shrink label is equal to the CSS block. And the CSS is also going to take backticks. And inside the backticks is where you add the styling. So here, this styling, instead of using main color like this, I'm going to use the JavaScript variable of main color. But here, really what we did is we created those same mixins and those CSS variables as these new JavaScript variables. In fact, I'm going to call this shrink label styles, so we know exactly what this is. Next, what we're going to do is we need to create this form input structure. So inside, notice how we target a label. We target this label because we need specifically a way inside of this group styles whenever something happens, such as when we focus on it. So for this, I'm going to make this form label first. As I mentioned before, you want to pick the things that are going to be targeted later. So here, what I need to make is this form input label. I'm going to say const form input label is equal to a styled label. And inside, I'm just going to drop in all of these. Now here, notice how instead what we use is the shrink class. So what we can do instead now is utilize a prop called shrink. So we would do a very similar thing, but instead, remember what we're trying to include though is shrink label styles. So what you can do is you can actually directly say, hey, I'm going to access the props right here. And I'm going to get off shrink, which instead of passing it as a class name, we're going to pass it as a Boolean. And then I'm going to say if shrink is true, then I want you to add in the shrink label styles, which means that when this is true, this entire line is going to evaluate to whatever is here. So this is just going to get applied like so. Imagine if when this shrink value is true, then we have these three styles. Otherwise, we don't. So that's really what this line is saying. So again, very powerful because now you can leverage your JavaScript inside of your style components. This becomes extremely flexible because now you have all of the flexibility that comes with JavaScript by default. We also want to make sure that we are using the correct subcolor and also that we are exporting this out. So now that we have our form label, the next thing we need to do is the input. So this form input. Here, I'm just going to call this input because our component is called form input. And because, again, this is scoped within our component anyways, it really does not matter. So I'm going to call this styled input. And here, I'm just going to bring in all of these styles. So just like before, we need to make sure that anywhere where we're calling, we need to make sure that we use our own components. Here, in fact, I didn't wrap this either because they're variables and we're working in strings. So whenever you need to use a variable, you need to remember to use interpolation. Oftentimes, I make this mistake and it's hard to catch. So let's do that there as well for border bottom. So now we don't have any more of those old Sass variables. Focus is fine. And here is what I was talking about. When you focus on this input, we want to find the immediate nearest sibling, subsequent sibling of the form input label, which we now have as a component. So we can now target it using JavaScript as well, like so. And then whenever this happens, what we want to do is we just want to add these shrink label styles, like so. And now this will just essentially render those styles whenever this gets focused. And then the last thing we need is our group component. So our group component is probably not going to contain that much else. So I'm going to say group is equal to a style div. And what's remaining is these position values as well as targeting input password like so. And that's it. We have now recreated everything that we need to into style components. So now let's go back to our form input component and let's actually utilize this. So instead, again, we need to re-import in all of the new components we've made. So form input label, as well as input and group. And now we can start replacing. Let's replace our div with our group. Let's replace the input with our new form input. And now for the label. So our form input label, as I mentioned, we need to make sure that instead of using this shrink like so as a class name, we can now pass it as a value. And this value is essentially just going to be equal to whatever we want it to be. So here, I'm just going to know that, well, if I'm using length anyways, and its truthiness is being evaluated, I don't even need to do this ternary. I'm just going to directly pass the number in. Because if the number of the length is 0, then this will be falsy. If it's greater than 0, then it'll be truthy, and shrink will be true inside of my actual shrink value prop. So let's just test this now. Let's come back to our application. Let's go to the sign-in, and there we see our form input is still working. The label is shrinking. Everything works. So here, a lot of the complexity is just about thinking, okay, when I'm going to target these later inside of the styling, I need to make sure that I declare it beforehand. If this comes after this, there will actually not be a valid target when this is being evaluated. So that's an important thing to think about the order of your style components. Otherwise, the other thing is just the fact that we are rendering a lot more JavaScript inside of this component. And it just is so much more flexible to do it this way. So that's it. This is pretty much the majority of the hardest parts to style. We've touched upon arguably all of the different types of tools that we have in style components now. This CSS block, if you need to pass blocks of styles around and conditionally render them, this is another really great tool that you can use. So now what I want you to do is style the rest of these components yourself. If there are any components that you're a little concerned about how to do, or you want to test yours against mine, there are numerous ways to do this. There's no perfect right way, as there is with any kind of styling or JavaScript. What you can do is check in your resources folder for a complete styled folder of the repository of this project, where I've styled everything over to style components. That is going to be the baseline project moving forward for a lot of any other further optimizations that we make, because this is pretty much the typical way that CSS and JS components are really written in most projects nowadays. But again, finish styling out all of these components, compare your work against mine if you want to see an idea of how you can do it if you ever get stuck. And that's it. Best of luck, enjoy the challenge, and I'll see you in the next video.